As Cartwright and his companions dined, they discussed being impressed, and even alarmed, by the innovation, by the might of Arkwright's water-powered factory, and the sheer volume of yarn produced. If this new mode of spinning by machinery should be generally adopted, so much more yarn would be manufactured than our own weavers could work up, one of Cartwright's friends said. It would have to be exported abroad, where it might be woven into cloth so cheaply as to injure the trade in England. The only remedy for such an evil, Cartwright replied, would be to apply the power of machinery to the art of weaving as well as to that of spinning. At that, Cartwright threw himself into building an automated loom. His first effort was a disaster. Cartwright built his prototype without ever observing a weaver in action, and wound up with a machine that required twice the manpower to produce a single garment. Humbled, he arranged a trip to Manchester, where weavers had flocked to tend to the surplus of yarn. Wool was giving way to cotton, and boatfuls of the stuff were streaming in from India and the United States. Cartwright's trip had two objectives. First, he wanted to raise interest in his machine among local business people. Second, he wanted to watch the weavers. He asked the working men to examine his prototype power loom and offer ideas for improvement. They flatly refused, immediately recognizing the implications of the machine. If it worked, it could put them out of a job. As he studied the weavers, Cartwright might have marvelled at the simplicity of their tools. He would have seen the intricacy of weaving work up close, the weavers' darting hands, flicking wrists, and endlessly rising and falling knees, all syncing up with the apparatus. Movements so assured they could perhaps have been said to be machine-like. Amidst the clanking din, Edmund Cartwright watched and made notes. He refined his prototype, not fully comprehending that the schemes bouncing around his skull would hit the gas on the Industrial Revolution, or what that might mean for the men and women like the weavers he was watching at work. By the end of the first decade of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. The most successful entrepreneurs and industrialists, the first tech titans we might call them, had accumulated impressive stores of wealth and power. Entrepreneurs and businessmen were mechanizing work in England's largest industry, automating jobs that had been bound by tradition for generations, and building new monuments of power and production. Factories and machines now confronted the younger generations of workers and artisans with a dark vision of the future. And those workers, those craftsmen, apprentices, machinists and croppers had few tools at their disposal to push back. But they had each other. They had the pen, and they had the hammer. In the spring of 1811, night after night, an unusual celestial body hung in the sky. The Great Comet of 1811 was widely believed to be a bad omen. Bad omens are common when times themselves are bad. And in 1811, for the working people of England, misery was everywhere. The Crown was levying heavy taxes on its middle class to pay for its war with France. Worse, it had imposed trade sanctions against France's allies, including the United States, cutting off crucial markets for England's enormous textile industry and plunging the cloth-producing regions into economic crisis. Across the nation, looms and stocking frames sat idle. 2 consecutive years of bad harvests left food prices painfully high. And while the cloth trade was at a point of weakness, a growing number of businessmen had introduced more automated machinery into their shops and factories. 22-year-old George Mellor would have been able to take in the sight of the Great Comet from his hometown of Huddersfield. Born in 1789, the year the French Revolution caught fire, George had a staunch moral code, a sharp tongue, and charisma to spare. He stood, as one local historian described him, 6 feet by the stick, and his eyes were brown and full of fire. Like so many young working men throughout the 1790s and 1800s, George had shipped off for war to fight against Napoleon in Europe. Also, like many veteran working men, he came to detest the war as it dragged on. When he was still a teenager, George embarked on a 7-year apprenticeship to become a cropper. The cloth finishing job required managing a pair of massive shears that weighed up to 60 pounds. A cropper used teasels to raise the nap or the rough surface of a woven piece of cloth, then ran the great blades over the wool to smooth it. It was exceedingly hard, skilled work, and left the body bent. You could tell a cropper by his enormous forearms and by the hoof of calloused skin that built up on the wrist. In the spring of 1811, George was in his early 20s, and he'd spent his post-adolescent life learning the trade. 7 years of hard, exacting labour. 7 years of paying his dues. That led to pride, an attachment to the work, to a brotherhood, to an identity. With its population of fewer than 10,000 souls, Huddersfield was small, but it convulsed with change. Like so much of Britain, the West Riding was industrialising fast, and small businesses engaged in the cloth trade were struggling. In fact, all George's life, change had seemed to consume his homeland. Factories blotted the landscape, and coal mines and steam engines blighted it. Huddersfield was on the front lines of the Industrial Revolution, though in 1811 no one was calling it that yet. For George, it was personal. 2 new machines, the gig mill and the shearing frame, were turning up in and around Huddersfield, and they could do with an unskilled operator, even a child, what croppers like George had taken years to perfect. George Mellor knew as well as anyone that the working people of England had plenty of reason to see bad omens in the night sky. About halfway through the same month that the great comet first appeared, a desperate, angry crowd filled the grime-encrusted medieval square in the centre of Nottingham. Fiery speeches broke out, and orators aired grievances. Some blasted the Crown for the war against Napoleon. Others yelled out against shop owners setting food prices too high. Still others called out for political reform, minimum wages, worker protections, representation. The speakers also took aim at another pressing trend: automation. They railed against the master hosiers, the business owners who bought and sold stockings, and other businessmen who were taken to using a device known as a wide frame to jack up the rate of production of garments and to justify lowering wages. Those machines, the stockingers yelled, were putting craftsmen out of work. Wide frame technology had been around for a while, but had chiefly been used to make cheaper, inferior goods. The stockingers didn't have any qualms with the use of the wide frame when it was making simple goods that they did not compete with. But as the shop owners used the wide frames to slash costs, and the knitters' wages, the machines came to embody the growing list of exploitations the men felt they were suffering. Framework knitters may not have been wealthy, but they were proud. Now, merchants and entrepreneurs were using machines to take over their work, to increase their own profit, and in a time of crisis, no less. Before this crisis, the cloth workers of Nottingham had tried to make their case to the hosiers and magistrates. They argued that substandard products would hurt the reputation of the industry, that using wide frames violated regulations, but their argument had fallen on deaf ears. So had lobbying. For a decade, the trade grew representing weavers, knitters and croppers, had petitioned Parliament and the Prime Minister, Spencer Perceval, to enforce the laws that the manufacturers violated. But time and again, Parliament sided against the workers. That day, tempers flared, and nervous city officials called in the dragoons to suppress the crowds, and they dispersed. After nightfall, the crowd reassembled just outside the city limits and grew to a throng of 2,000, even 3,000 people. The teeming, haphazardly organised legion of workers made its way to nearby Arnold, where a new textile factory stood. In the dark, the men covered their faces with black masks and slipped inside. With a massive blacksmith's hammer, they destroyed the implements of automation one by one. Before sunrise, 60 of the obnoxious machines had been smashed to pieces. Small, organised attacks carried out by bands of masked men continued in the following days. More wide frames, and only the wide frames, were left in ruins. The disturbances convinced Nottingham hosiers to call a meeting, where their first order of business was to condemn the illegal measures which have been resorted to by some of the framework knitters. The second order was to issue a proclamation that resolved to recommend to the trade in general to give for all full-fashioned work the old prices. These machine breakers had won. They had, for the moment, preserved their ability to earn a living.
Hugo Spear continues to read Blood in the Machine by Brian Merchant at the same time tomorrow. If you'd like to hear episode 2 now, it's available together with the other episodes on BBC Sounds. The abridger was Richard Hamilton, the producer Elizabeth Allard. Later today on Radio 4 we'll be discussing some of those issues, how new technologies are changing working life. 4:30 we'll examine how AI is changing the film industry in the artificial human.
BBC Sounds. Hi, Namlanta Kombo here. My award-winning podcast, Dear Daughter, is back.
To my dearest only daughter, be the brightest shining light.
Celebrating women's voices.
You're very welcome to Now You're Asking with me, Marion Keys.
And me, Tara Flynn. This is juicy. No limits, no limits,
no limits. Celebrating women.
Where to Be a Woman is the podcast celebrating the best of women's well-being. We're on a quest to find out where in the world women are living their best lives.
Listen on BBC Sounds.
BBC News at 10 o'clock. A number of leading news agencies have withdrawn an official photo of the Princess of Wales and her 3 children because of concerns that it may have been digitally manipulated. The picture, taken by Prince William, was the first of the princess since she underwent abdominal surgery in January. Roya Nikar, the royal editor of the Sunday Times, thinks the photo has undergone suboptimal editing.
Retouching and editing of royal images is really nothing new, but perhaps what this image has fallen foul of are what I understand relatively recent changes in tightening up guidelines that a lot of picture agencies have made over widespread concerns about the use of AI, although there's no suggestion that AI was used in the retouching of this image, because in all the years I've been doing this job, I've never seen a response like this to a royal image that's been issued.
The recently sacked Independent Inspector of Borders and Immigration has called the Home Office dysfunctional and says that it needs complete reform. David Neal said failings in the immigration system went right to the top of the organisation. The Home Office says Mr Neal was sacked for leaking sensitive information he was told was inaccurate. Palestinians have begun marking Ramadan, the Islamic month of fasting, with fierce battles continuing between Israeli forces and Hamas fighters in Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to press ahead with an offensive against the city of Rafah in southern Gaza, despite President Biden warning against it. Police in Switzerland say 5 cross-country skiers have been found dead. They were part of a group of 6 that went missing near the Matterhorn mountain on Saturday. Extreme weather conditions have been hampering the search and rescue operation. 5 of these 6 were from the same family. And the Office for National Statistics has revealed the latest changes to its basket of goods, the group of 740 products which is used to measure the rate of inflation. Popcorn and bottles of hand sanitizer have been removed, but air fryers have been added. Vinyl has also been reintroduced for the first time in 32 years. BBC News.
The people who run social media companies know they need to make their platforms safer, but they're at something of a crossroads at the moment. Will they radically overhaul the entire business model or begin a huge digital clean-up operation? The Gatekeepers is at 11 o'clock here on Radio 4. First though, it's Woman's Hour with Emma Barnett.
Good morning and welcome to the programme. Rumours have been swirling for months. Personally, I've been surprised at the range of women who've asked me if I know what's really going on with Catherine, the Princess of Wales's health since her planned abdominal surgery in January. Disclaimer, I don't, nor do I particularly wish to. Yes, Woman's Hour has been around a long time, but we don't have a hotline into the women of the royal family. But apart from the fact that speculating over a woman's health is far from edifying and is just that, speculation with no evidence, the interest, especially amongst women, some women I should say, seems particularly high. But in what could be a first for an image of a royal, now a seemingly benign Mother's Day image of Catherine surrounded by her children taken by Prince William has been retracted by several major photo agencies because of concerns over digital manipulation. Today I'm going to speak to an editor who has worked closely with the Princess of Wales, having interviewed her and arranged a very famous photo shoot of her too. It's the context though we're going to examine, because the move to release such a photograph on a day celebrating motherhood has been seen by some as an attempt to lay to rest the endless rumour and speculation as to what's really going on with the senior royal, if anything at all beyond what has been stated. And now some say this move has backfired spectacularly. One headline as I came on air simply put it as the photo that made everything worse. How to respond in the digital era where rumour, allegation and, let's just be straight, downright lies can not only circulate but get bigger and bigger has become a bit of an unwitting theme on today's Woman's Hour, as you'll hear shortly when I talk to one of the women involved in what became known as the Hampstead hoax. I'll get to that soon. But I wanted to give you the chance to say how you have or would respond to an untruth or a lie or even an allegation that starts online. What have you done? What would you do? Have you countered it? Have you gone to the person, if you knew them, who perhaps started it and asked what's going on? Have you confronted? Perhaps you've taken legal action. Or maybe you've done nothing at all. Maybe you've totally ignored it, thinking that would be the right way to respond to something that hasn't got any basis in truth. We're living in times where the truth is debated, facts are also debated. What would you do? What have you done? Especially when you consider, cases right from the royal family through to what we're going to hear, a group of mothers just sending their children to school. These two, of course, in no way connected, but it's an interesting theme, as I say, that's unwittingly sprung up on today's programme. What would you do? What have you done? The number is 84844. On social media, we're at BBC Woman's Hour, or you can email me. I always like to hear from you through the Woman's Hour website, or send a WhatsApp message or voice note on 03700 100 444. Do a voice note if you can. It'd be lovely to hear your voices. Also on today's programme, of that story, one of the women falsely accused of being part of what was described as a satanic paedophile ring at a school in North London is breaking her silence. We'll be hearing from her direct. We'll be remembering Jenny Lee in her own right, a miner's daughter from Scotland who became an MP at the age of 24 at a time when she wasn't even legally old enough to vote. Some of her story being shown on stage at the National Theatre at the moment. She ended up marrying Nye Bevan, one of the architects of the NHS. And England rugby player Meg Jones gets us warmed up for the Women's Six Nations. All that to come. But the photograph gracing the front page of almost all major newspapers this morning, a photograph of the Princess of Wales surrounded by her children, taken by Prince William, as we understand, was the first image of Catherine to be released by Kensington Palace since what's been described as her planned abdominal surgery in January. Now, 4 international photo agencies, including Reuters and Associated Press, have retracted the photo over concerns it has been manipulated, specifically noting an inconsistency in alignment of Princess Charlotte's left hand in what could be a first for a royal photograph. Kensington Palace has declined to comment. social media conspiracies have been rife, and in fact have been for months, as to what is really wrong with the Princess of Wales. So much so, last week Kensington Palace did respond with the following statement: "We were very clear from the outset that the Princess of Wales was out until after Easter." It also added she was doing well. PA Media, I should say the UK's biggest news agency, through which the royal family regularly releases its official information, including to the BBC, said it had not killed the picture on its service, but a spokesman has said that the agency was seeking, quote, urgent clarification from Kensington Palace over concerns raised about manipulation. And I'm joined now by someone who knows Catherine, the Princess of Wales, from having advised her early on about designers for her wedding dress, through to their work together when she placed her on the front cover of British Vogue's centenary issue. Alexandra Schulman, former editor of British Vogue and journalist. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's your reaction to this, first of all, this story?
Well, it's an extraordinary story. I only heard it this morning when I woke up, and I think what's peculiar about it is that images nowadays are, so many of them are retouched, photoshopped, call it what you will, digitally manipulated. And so for four big news agents to make such a fuss about this one does make one think that there is something that we're not clear about, that they think is a real problem.
And knowing of her as you do, and you've done work together, maybe we'll get to that, I hope. You know, this in itself has become the story, which was obviously not the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, last week I was having dinner with a kind of comms person and...
communications, for those who don't work in that.
Communications, and she was saying, you know, can't understand, why don't they just put out a picture, it would keep everyone happy, keep everyone quiet. And I said, well, you know, I think if they put out a picture, then that picture is just going to become the story. And of course, in a way I hadn't imagined, this is what's happened. And instead of it just being a nice Mother's Day picture, it's now just kind of boosted all the conspiracy theories that are rattling around. I mean, they've made it perfectly clear, Kensington Palace, what the timeline on Princess of Wales' recovery was going to be. She was in hospital for exactly the amount of time they said she was. They made it clear she wasn't going to be up and about until after Easter. And I feel deeply sorry for them that by trying to do something that was going to make everyone sort of feel better, it's all gone wrong.
We're getting some interesting messages coming in, and many of them, if I was to summarise these first few, certainly, and you know, it'll keep going, I'm sure, throughout the programme as it usually does. Who cares? She's entitled to a private life, especially about her health. Poor woman. Imagine if we'd had serious surgery and then all of this. Deep sigh. Another one here. Can we give this family a break? Have some respect for a family going through a difficult time. There's a lot more in the world going on of greater importance right now. But there is a situation where that doesn't reflect how many people are talking about it in a different way. And there are these rumours, and people are saying all sorts of things. And I just wonder, from your perspective, what your response is to that, especially women being very interested in this.
Well, I think that we have to be very careful about sort of social media chat. You were talking earlier on about, you know, how people should react in their own lives to comments that are made. And I think that Prince William is obsessive about privacy. He really wanted privacy, really wants privacy. And I feel that for Catherine, the idea that, you know, the world's wondering what's gone wrong or going on with abdominal surgery or whatever, you know, is a nightmare. But I think they are taking the best route, which is to not address it, because the more you contribute to debate, you just fire it up. I mean, the never complain, never explain. It's really difficult to do when you're the target, but it is very good advice.
Just going back to what you said about Prince William there, with what you know of the couple, is that also going to be driving this approach? Because there will be some who have the view, and I'm here to try and represent different views at times where I can, who say, yes, entitled to privacy, but we're also entitled to know when someone isn't carrying out public duties, what exactly is wrong with them. You've seen the same of the King. What type of cancer in it? You've seen that one more detail is required or requested. How much of Prince William and his influence and his concern about privacy, especially for his family, will be driving this, do you think?
think it's just kind of prurient. I don't think there's any good reason why we have to know exactly what the King's cancer is, or why we have to know exactly what's, what Princess of Wales's surgery was about. I mean, for years and years, the royal family have been funded by the nation, and heaven knows how many illnesses they've all had over the decades that we knew nothing about.
Yes, and with your relationship with her, I mentioned that centenary edition. It was a beautiful image on the front cover. People will perhaps remember it. If they don't, they can look it up. What is she like to talk to do business with? Most people listening will never do that.
Well, it sounds soppy, but she's a real delight. I mean, she's just a very friendly. Admittedly, that was 2016, and so I haven't had a long conversation with her for now, since she's become Princess of Wales, but I think she's a very straightforward person to deal with. She really is a sort of real mother. That's her big focus, is being a real mother. She loves the outdoors. She's not particularly a fashion plate, but she realizes that she's had to become one, really, and that's become a part of her USP, and I don't have a bad word to say about her.
I was reading one of your columns you write in the Mail, and you were talking about her and this image of her at Prince Philip's funeral, and how she had grown into this particular role, and where she was in the royal family, and how that had shifted, which I thought was interesting, and in terms of her development and the development that the nation, the public, some have with her, and that relationship, and how it's grown. And I think it's just interesting to think about how she's developed as well in people's minds as the royal family has been changing.
Yeah, and also because with Harry and Meghan having left the country, there's now fewer people to go around in the royal family, and I think both her and actually the Queen have had to sort of not just step up, but have had to be very aware of what the nation thinks about them in possibly a new way, and I think they've both done very well. I mean, you can't. Of course, there are lovely things in life about being Princess of Wales, but it's demanding, and I suspect the reason why she is, keeping well away is that as soon as she reappears, she's going to be everywhere. Every picture of her is going to be everywhere. And imagine, surgery takes its toll, and she's going to have to put up with all kind of comments about, oh, she doesn't look like this, or she doesn't look like that, and did you notice she did this, did you notice she did that? That's going to be tough. I'm sure they want to keep her away from that as long as possible.
Yeah, and just to say, there's also somewhat of an irony. I mean, it's been very striking that she has always been, Catherine, Princess of Wales, the one who takes the photos, usually.
Yes.
And I mean, you could make a bit of a joke here. The one time that she asked her husband to do the photograph because she's been in it, there's been a bit of a mess up. I'm not going to make that joke, but you can see how it could be made. But there, she has been, and there has been this element of her curating the image of her family. And now we have this row over an image that was set to be released to, I'm sure, as you were talking about, for some, placate some of those concerns, and there's perhaps somewhat of an irony there.
Yes, I mean, what I go back to is the question is, what is it that the news agencies are concerned about? I mean, I really doubt they're worried about the positioning of Prince Louis's finger. It just doesn't make sense, and it's quite possible that Prince William isn't the greatest photographer in the world, and actually they had to do quite a lot of work on that picture, and maybe that's made it seem inauthentic to a degree that they won't accept. But, images of the royal family have been, back to, Cecil Beaton taking pictures of the Queen where, he sort of take a scalpel knife to her body and cut out her figure, and they've been manipulated always. So this is nothing new, but the reaction by the press agencies is something new.
Yes, lots of questions to be answered and asked, it seems, this morning. Kensington Palace, no comment as of yet, but it's good to return to the original reason for our discussion. Quite a funny message here from Helen, which says, It's not so simple to get 3 children to behave without mischief naturally in photos when you want all with equally happy face. In the past, we've had to cut out a face and stick it on. So much easier with an iPad. There you go, different approach to editing, but some people will be able to relate to. And some interesting messages also coming in, how you respond to allegation, that bigger point, which I'll come to in a moment. Alexandra Schulman, former editor of British Vogue, who worked with Catherine, Princess of Wales, on that centenary issue of British Vogue where she was on the cover. Interesting to get your take this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
A message here: the online world moves so quickly. The best way to weather storms is not to rise to it. Other than very famous people, most of the general population lose interest very quickly. Well, let's keep with that in mind, because what happens when something gets said about you that's not true, but to a whole other level? What would you do if overnight people around the world suddenly decided you were part of a satanic paedophile ring that was sexually abusing children? As ridiculous, improbable and crazy as this might sound, this happened to one of my next guests alongside fellow parents and teachers at her children's school. They were all a victim of what has become known as the Hampstead hoax. It is the subject of a new Channel 4 TV documentary called Accused, the Hampstead Paedophile Hoax, which looks at how a conspiracy theory centred around a so-called satanic paedophile ring in Hampstead went viral and reached people on the other side of the world, one of whom fundraised his way from America to the North London Schoolgate for a confrontation and was jailed in a British prison. Mothers whose children appeared on a list of so-called victims were subject to harassment, including death threats and calls from real paedophiles interested in their children. Now 4 of the mothers at the centre of the conspiracy are speaking out for the first time. The documentary uses their real voices from audio interviews, and their parts are acted and lip-synced by actors. Here's a bit of the beginning of the documentary setting out the story.
We called the police, and it was a bizarre call because I said to the police operator, I don't quite know how to explain this, but I've been accused of being a satanic paedophile, and I've been accused of abusing my daughter in this way. And the police operator said, okay, well, the police are on their way to your house.
9 years ago, 2 small children accused a community of the worst crimes imaginable.
What did they do to you?
Their allegations went viral online and were circulated around the world. A group of parents were accused of abusing their 9-year-old children and their classmates.
The only important job you have in life is to protect your child. And to have a potential threat towards them is a mum's worst nightmare. You just have this sickening gut feeling of just disgust that someone would think you would do that to your child.
Joining me now, the director of the documentary, Emily Turner, and one of the mothers, Anna, I should say not her real name. Welcome to you both. Anna, if I could start with you, good morning.
Good morning, Emma. Thank you for having me.
And, you know, talking out is difficult at the best of times, but especially when so many things have been said about you that are not the case, that are not true. Why now? Why is it important?
I think obviously we've had to think long and hard, the 4 mums, about speaking out, and that's, you know, a good question. I think we understand that there is a risk with us doing so and raising our head above the parapet, where we've spent a long time trying to get rid of material online predominantly about our children. But we feel that we do have a series of really important messages, and now is the right time. Predominantly, I think, you know, there needs to be an awareness with people about oversharing on the internet. We weren't particularly guilty of that, but we did see various people harvesting photos from Facebook from amongst the teachers and the families that were concerned. And then also, we feel very strongly that all of the material that was hosted online was done so almost with the blessing of the social media companies, and we had a really long, hard fight and sometimes an impossible task in being able to remove the material about our families that was there, predominantly our children whose futures were going to be affected by it. We know that everybody Googles everybody now, and when they were going to go to college or to university or going to a job interview, it was likely that people would be Googling and that this material would be found about them. So we really do want to sort of join the growing narrative and the growing sort of talk, I think, of trying to have social media companies take responsibility for what they're hosting. I mean, they were hosting very illegal content about very real children, and when we said, these are real children, their names and addresses are online and they're 9 years old, we were continuously met with, this does not reach our community standards, so we're not willing to remove it. So there's been a lot of cases that I think that have come after us where there is an awareness that social media companies need to really look at what they're hosting. So I think it was the right time for us to tell our tale.
Yes, and it's certainly, other parents with very tragic stories are with their voices being very much at the front of that fight, and also what's gone on in Parliament as well with law change. If I can, I'll come back to that. But to your story, life pre 2015, I imagine it was pretty normal in your corner of North London.
Absolutely. We were all working mothers and we were just sort of getting on with our lives. We were trying to juggle running businesses, active careers, trying to juggle that, school run, drop off, homework, family life, social life, and working. So very much normal. It was before the 5th of February 2015 and life after.
And what happened on that date?
At around about 4 p.m. on the 5th of February 2015, we received an email from the school to say that there had been some allegations made regarding the school, but the police had investigated, and there were no further investigations required and the case was closed, which is probably the worst email that could have been sent, because your natural reaction is to say, well, what allegations? And of course, you turn to the internet, and unfortunately for me, it didn't take me very long to find out the nature of the allegations and the fact that myself, my husband,